The morning sun barely pierced through the thick Virginia fog as 32 recruits stumbled off the bus at Quantico Marine Corps Base. Among them stood a woman so unremarkable that most wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after meeting her. Sarah Chun was 5'4", wore oversized glasses that constantly slipped down her nose, and carried herself with the kind of quiet demeanor that made drill sergeants assume she'd wash out before lunch. What none of them knew was that hidden beneath her civilian clothes lay a small silver trident pin that would change everything they thought they knew about strength, courage, and the person standing right next to them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The February air bit through everyone's jackets as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the administrative building, his boots creating sharp echoes against the concrete. His eyes swept across the group of new arrivals with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen thousands of hopefuls come and go. Most would fail. Some would quit. A few might actually make it through the program. Sarah Chun stood toward the back of the group, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder in a way that suggested she wasn't quite sure how to carry it properly. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she kept pushing those wire-rimmed glasses up her nose every few seconds. To Rodriguez, she looked like someone who'd gotten lost on her way to a library science conference. "Listen up, recruits." Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You're here because someone, somewhere, thought you had what it takes to join an elite cybersecurity unit. I'm here to prove them wrong." The group straightened, trying to look military despite their civilian clothes. Sarah remained relaxed, her posture unremarkable among the others who were clearly overcompensating with ramrod-straight spines and jutting chins. "This isn't basic training," Rodriguez continued, pacing in front of them. "This is specialized selection. You'll be tested on everything from advanced network penetration to survival skills. Most of you will fail because you think being smart is enough. It's not." Standing 3 people to Sarah's left was Marcus Thompson, a former college linebacker, whose broad shoulders and confident stance immediately drew attention. Behind him, Jennifer Walsh shifted nervously, her pristine workout clothes suggesting she'd spent considerable time preparing for the physical aspects of selection. Near the front, David Kim clutched a folder of certifications, his multiple cybersecurity credentials practically radiating from his perfectly pressed khakis. Rodriguez's eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment, and she could practically see the dismissal in his expression. 5'4", glasses, quiet demeanor. He'd already written her off as someone who might handle the computer work, but would crumble under pressure. "Your first test starts now," Rodriguez announced. "You have 30 minutes to get to Building 47, change into PT gear, and report to the obstacle course. Anyone who's late gets sent home immediately." The group scattered like startled birds, most of them pulling out phones to check maps or frantically looking around for directional signs. Sarah simply shouldered her bag properly and started walking in what appeared to be a random direction. Marcus Thompson caught up to her, his long strides easily matching her pace. "Hey, you know where Building 47 is?" Sarah glanced at him briefly. "Southeast corner, past the commissary." "How do you know that?" I looked at the base map while everyone else was listening to the speech. Marcus laughed, a sound that held more condescension than humor. "Smart, though I'm not sure studying maps is going to help when we get to the real physical stuff." Sarah didn't respond, continuing her steady pace while Marcus jogged ahead to catch up with some of the other recruits who'd formed an impromptu group. She could hear Jennifer Walsh's nervous chatter about her marathon training times, and David Kim's detailed explanation of his home gym setup. Building 47 turned out to be a converted warehouse with temporary changing facilities. Sarah found herself in a corner of the women's area, quietly changing into standard issue PT gear while Jennifer continued her monologue about optimal nutrition timing for physical performance. "I mean, I've been doing CrossFit for 3 years," Jennifer was saying to 2 other women recruits. "My trainer says I have the work capacity of someone 10 years younger. What about you, Sarah? What's your fitness background?" Sarah pulled on her PT shirt, the fabric loose enough to hide her actual physique. "I swim sometimes." "Oh, that's nice." Recreational swimming is good for general fitness, though it doesn't really prepare you for the kind of functional strength training we'll probably face here. "Probably not," Sarah agreed, tying her shoes with efficient movements that suggested muscle memory rather than conscious thought. The obstacle course was a maze of walls, rope climbs, tire flips, and water hazards that looked designed to break both bodies and spirits. Rodriguez stood at the starting line with a clipboard and a stopwatch, his expression suggesting he was already mentally calculating failure rates. "This isn't about speed," he announced as the 32 recruits lined up. "This is about how you handle obstacles under pressure. You'll go through in groups of 4. First group, you're up." "Marcus." Thompson stepped forward immediately, his confidence radiating as he sized up the course. David Kim looked nervous but determined. Jennifer Walsh was doing dynamic stretches that seemed more for show than function. Sarah simply stood at the starting line, her hands loose at her sides. "Go!" Marcus attacked the first wall like he was still playing college football, hauling himself over with raw power and landing heavily on the other side. David Kim struggled more, his computer-focused lifestyle showing as he fought for grip strength on the rope climb. Jennifer Walsh moved with practiced efficiency through most obstacles, but began to fade as the course wore on. Sarah moved through the course like water finding its way downhill. She didn't fight the obstacles. She flowed around them, over them, through them. Her wall climb was economical, using her legs more than her arms. Her rope technique was flawless, ascending with a rhythm that suggested countless hours of practice. When she reached the tire flip section, she moved the massive rubber wheels with a hip drive and footwork that would have impressed powerlifting coaches. But what struck Rodriguez most was her breathing. While the other recruits were gasping, grunting, and showing clear signs of exertion, Sarah's breath remained controlled, almost meditative. She finished the course 3rd in her group, behind Marcus's brute force approach, but ahead of both David and Jennifer. "Not bad for a librarian," Marcus said as they regrouped, his tone still condescending despite the fact that she'd outperformed him on several obstacles. Sarah didn't respond, instead moving to the back of the group as Rodriguez called up the next 4 recruits. She watched each group navigate the course, her eyes tracking techniques and noting weaknesses with the focus of someone conducting tactical assessment rather than casual observation. The day continued with a series of evaluations that seemed designed to test every possible weakness. There was a written cybersecurity exam that had most recruits sweating through complex network architecture problems. Sarah completed it in half the allotted time, her pencil moving with the confidence of someone who'd seen these scenarios before. The team-building exercise, groups were given a communications problem to solve using limited equipment. Sarah's group included Marcus, Jennifer, and a quiet guy named Robert Hayes who'd barely spoken since arrival. Marcus immediately took charge, his voice dominating the discussion as he outlined what he thought was the optimal approach. "We need to establish a primary communication channel first," he declared, gesturing at the radio equipment they'd been given. "Then build redundancy through the secondary systems." Jennifer nodded eagerly. "That makes sense. I read about layered communication protocols in a cybersecurity blog last month." Robert Hayes looked overwhelmed by the technical discussion, his background in general IT clearly not preparing him for the advanced concepts being thrown around. Sarah sat quietly, examining the equipment with gentle touches that revealed its capabilities without the aggressive manipulation the others were employing. After 10 minutes of increasingly heated discussion about frequency management and encryption protocols, she finally spoke. "The primary radio is broken," she said quietly. Marcus paused mid-sentence. "What? The primary radio? The frequency crystal is cracked. You can see it if you remove the back panel carefully." Marcus grabbed the radio and started trying to force the back panel off. "It looks fine to me." Sarah reached over and pressed 2 small tabs simultaneously, causing the panel to slide off smoothly. Inside, the crystal was indeed cracked, a hairline fracture that would have made the radio completely unreliable. "How did you know how to open that?" Jennifer asked, her voice carrying a note of suspicion. "Most military radios have similar access panels," Sarah replied, already examining the secondary equipment. "This one's functional, but the antenna array is configured wrong for the frequency we need." Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah quietly reconfigured their communications setup while the others continued debating theory. When Rodriguez came to check their progress, their system was not only functional but optimized in ways that impressed even his experienced eye. "Interesting approach," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "Who designed this configuration?" Marcus started to answer, but Jennifer cut him off. "It was a team effort, but Sarah did most of the technical work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Rodriguez's eyes focused on Sarah with new interest. "Military experience?" "Some," Sarah replied. The answer so vague it revealed nothing while technically being truthful. The afternoon brought survival skills testing, something that clearly worried most of the recruits. They were given basic supplies and told to demonstrate fire starting, shelter building, and water purification techniques. Most approached these tasks with the awkward determination of people who'd watched YouTube videos, but never actually needed to. Survive in the wilderness. Sarah built her fire with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times in conditions far worse than the controlled environment of Quantico. Her shelter was constructed with an understanding of weather patterns and heat retention that suggested real-world experience. When it came time to purify water, she demonstrated 3 different methods and explained the advantages of each. "Where did you learn all this?" Robert Hayes asked, his own attempts at fire starting having failed spectacularly. "Camping," Sarah replied, helping him adjust his Tinder bundle without making him feel incompetent. As the day wound down, the recruits were exhausted, stressed, and beginning to form the kind of hierarchies that always emerged in high-pressure situations. Marcus had positioned himself as the natural leader, his confidence and physical presence making others defer to his judgment. Jennifer had become his lieutenant, her fitness background and eager personality making her useful for organizing group activities. David Kim had found his niche as the technical expert, despite Sarah's quiet demonstrations of superior knowledge. Sarah remained on the periphery, noticed but not really seen. She'd performed competently in every task without drawing attention to herself. Her scores were solid, but not outstanding. Her demeanor remained quiet and unassuming. To most observers, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a smart, reasonably fit woman who might do well in the cybersecurity aspects of the program, but would probably struggle with the more demanding physical and leadership challenges ahead. Rodriguez gathered the group as the sun began to set over the Virginia landscape. "Today was your introduction. Tomorrow, we start the real testing. Get some rest, you'll need it." As the recruits dispersed toward their temporary quarters, Sarah lingered for a moment, her eyes scanning the base with the practiced assessment of someone who knew military installations well. The evening light caught her glasses, hiding her expression as she watched her fellow recruits discuss the day's events in small groups. Marcus was already holding court near the barracks entrance, his voice carrying clearly across the evening air. "The physical stuff is going to separate the wheat from the chaff pretty quickly. Some people here are going to realize they're in over their heads." His eyes found Sarah as she approached the group, and his meaning was clear. She was wheat, not chaff in his estimation. Someone who might contribute in a support role but would never be a real operator. Sarah simply nodded politely and headed inside, leaving the others to their speculation about what tomorrow would bring. She had a pretty good idea what the next few days would hold, and she was looking forward to seeing how long it would take before someone figured out that appearances could be very, very deceiving. In her small room, Sarah unpacked her gear with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this many times before. At the bottom of her duffel bag, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, was a small silver pin. She held it up to the light, its distinctive trident shape catching the fluorescent bulb's glow. The pin was worn smooth in places, evidence of years of wear and countless missions that had tested its owner in ways these recruits couldn't begin to imagine. Sarah placed the pin back in its cloth wrapping and tucked it away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities for her fellow recruits to underestimate the quiet woman with the glasses who seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable, so completely out of place among the aspiring elite operators. Had no idea what was coming. Dawn arrived with the harsh clang of metal on metal as Rodriguez used a wrench to bang against the barracks door. The recruits stumbled out of their bunks, most still groggy from a restless night spent worrying about what lay ahead. Sarah was already dressed and ready, sitting calmly on her bunk while others frantically searched for socks and struggled with bootlaces. 5 minutes to the briefing room, Rodriguez barked. Anyone who's late starts the day with a 2-mile run in full gear. The briefing room was a sterile space with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly sick. Rodriguez stood at the front next to a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Her uniform bore the insignia of a lieutenant colonel, and her eyes swept the assembled recruits with calculating precision. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Morrison," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades in special operations. "For the next 2 weeks you belong to me. Some of you think you're here because you're smart. Others think you're here because you're tough. You're all wrong. You're here because we need to find out if you can think clearly when everything is falling apart around you." She gestured to a screen that displayed a complex network diagram. "This is your first real test. Each team will be assigned a section of compromised network infrastructure. Your job is to identify the breach, contain, and restore security while under active cyber attack. The catch? You'll be doing this while dealing with physical stressors designed to replicate real-world conditions." The recruits exchanged glances, uncertainty written across their faces. This wasn't the straightforward cybersecurity work they'd expected. "Teams have already been assigned," Morrison continued. "Team Alpha, Thompson, Walsh, Kim, and Hayes. Team Beta, Chun, Rodriguez, Patterson, and Williams." Sarah found herself grouped with 3 recruits she'd barely spoken to. Miguel Rodriguez was a former Army IT specialist who'd been quiet but competent during the previous day's exercises. Lisa Patterson was a recent computer science graduate whose confidence had been shaken by the physical demands they'd faced. Tony Williams was an older candidate, maybe 40, with a background in corporate security who seemed to be struggling with the military aspects of the program. Team Alpha, you'll be working from the secure facility. Team Beta, you'll be in the field environment. Both teams will be working on the same compromised network, but from different access points. The first team to successfully restore security and identify the source of the breach wins. The losing team runs 5 miles in full gear. Marcus Thompson's face lit up with competitive fire. His team had gotten the comfortable assignment, working from a climate-controlled room with proper workstations. Sarah's team would be dealing with whatever field environment meant, which probably wouldn't be pleasant. 20 minutes later, Sarah understood Morrison's definition of field environment. Team Beta found themselves in a shipping container that had been converted into a makeshift command center. The space was cramped, poorly ventilated, and filled with the kind of jury-rigged equipment that barely functioned under ideal conditions. Worse, speakers mounted in the corners were broadcasting a constant stream of simulated gunfire, explosions, and radio chatter designed to create maximum distraction. "This is insane," Lisa Patterson muttered, trying to make sense of the network topology displayed on a flickering monitor. "How are we supposed to concentrate with all this noise?" Tony Williams was already sweating despite the morning chill. "I can't even think straight. Where do we start?" Miguel Rodriguez sat down at one of the terminals and started typing methodically. "We start with basic network reconnaissance. Map what we can see, identify what's been compromised." Sarah took a position at the central workstation, her fingers moving across the keyboard with smooth efficiency, while her teammates struggled with the cacophony of simulated combat sounds. She seemed completely unaffected by the audio assault. Her breathing remained steady, her focus absolute. "The initial breach came through the email server," she announced after just a few minutes of analysis. "But that was a diversion. The real attack is happening through the HVAC system controls." Miguel looked up from his screen. "How can you be sure?" "Because the email server breach is too obvious. It's designed to draw attention while the real attack happens elsewhere. Look at the network traffic patterns." She gestured to her screen, where data flows were represented as colored lines. The VAFEX system is communicating with external servers on ports that should be blocked. Lisa Patterson squinted at Sarah's analysis. "But the email server is showing massive data exfiltration. How is that a diversion?" "Because the data being exfiltrated is junk. Random files, old documents, nothing sensitive. It's designed to look like a successful breach while the real attack establishes persistent access through the building control systems." Tony Williams shook his head. "That seems like a pretty sophisticated analysis for someone who swims sometimes." Sarah's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. "I read a lot of security blogs." Meanwhile, through the small window in their shipping container, they could see Team Alpha working in their comfortable facility. Marcus Thompson was gesturing animatedly, clearly running the show, while Jennifer Walsh typed frantically at her workstation. David Kim was consulting printed documentation, his multiple certifications apparently providing the theoretical framework for their approach. "They're going after the email server," Miguel observed, watching their competitors through the window. "That's what they're supposed to do," Sarah replied. "The question is whether they'll realize it's a trap before they trigger the deadman switch." "What deadman switch?" Lisa asked. Sarah pulled up another screen, showing the network architecture. "The email server breach is designed to look like the main attack. But if you try to close it down without first neutralizing the VACA system access, the attacker's script will activate and wipe critical system files. It's a classic double bind scenario." The audio assault continued, explosions and gunfire creating a constant backdrop of stress. Lisa Patterson was visibly struggling, her hands shaking as she tried to navigate the complex network interfaces. Tony Williams kept wiping sweat from his forehead, his corporate security background clearly not preparing him for this kind of pressure. But Sarah remained in what could only be described as a state of calm focus. The simulated combat sounds that were rattling her teammates seemed to have no effect on her whatsoever. If anything, she appeared more relaxed than she had during the previous day's exercises. "I've got the HVAC system isolated," she announced. "Miguel, can you start working on the secondary intrusion through the printer network? Lisa, I need you to monitor the email server, but don't interact with it yet. Tony, watch for any new connections trying to establish themselves." Her teammates followed her instructions with growing confidence. Sarah's calm competence was infectious, and even Lisa Patterson began to settle into her assigned role. The shipping container that had seemed like a torture chamber 20 minutes earlier was becoming a functional command center. Through the window, they could see Team Alpha celebrating. Marcus Thompson was pumping his fist in the air while Jennifer Walsh clapped excitedly. David Kim was pointing at his screen, apparently having found something significant. "Looks like they think they've won," Tony observed. "They've found the email server breach," Sarah confirmed, watching her analysis screens. "And they're about to try to close it down. Should we warn them?" Lisa asked. "This is a competition," Miguel replied. "Besides, they wouldn't listen anyway." Sarah was already typing rapidly, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a rhythm that suggested muscle memory developed over years of practice. "I'm implementing the fix for the HVAC intrusion. Once that's neutralized, the email server will be safe to approach." Suddenly, alarms began blaring from the direction of Team Alpha's facility. Through the window, they could see Marcus Thompson standing at his workstation, his face flushed with anger and confusion. Jennifer Walsh was frantically typing while David Kim consulted his documentation with increasing desperation. "They triggered the dead man switch," Sarah said without looking up from her work. "Their system is probably locked down now." "How long will it take them to recover?" Miguel asked. "Depends on how good their backup procedures are. Could be minutes, could be hours." Sarah's analysis was correct. Team Alpha had fallen into exactly the trap she'd identified. Their aggressive approach to the email server breach, triggering defensive measures that locked down their entire network access. From their shipping container, Team Beta could see Marcus Thompson gesturing angrily at his teammates, clearly frustrated by the setback. "Network security restored," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "The intrusion has been contained, malicious access removed, and system integrity verified. Total time, 37 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison appeared at their shipping container door, her expression unreadable. "Explain your approach." Sarah stood, her presentation clear and concise. The email server breach was a diversion tactic designed to mask the real attack through building control systems. The attacker established persistent access through the EVAC network, then created an obvious breach in the email system to draw attention. The email server was rigged with a deadman switch that would activate if approached incorrectly, buying the attacker time to complete their real objective. And what was their real objective? Long-term access to the building's physical security systems. With control of HVAC, lighting, and access controls, they could have monitored occupancy patterns, identified high-value targets, and planned physical infiltration at optimal times. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a sophisticated analysis for someone with civilian cybersecurity experience." "I've studied advanced persistent threat scenarios," Sarah replied, her tone remaining neutral. Through the window, Team Alpha was still struggling with their lockdown systems. Marcus Thompson's leadership was beginning to show cracks under pressure, his voice audible even through the shipping container walls as he snapped at his teammates. "Team Alpha's recovery time?" Morrison asked. Sarah glanced at her screen, where she'd been monitoring their network activity. "They're attempting to restore from backup, but they'll need to completely rebuild their analysis environment. Probably another hour minimum. And if they'd approached it correctly? The same 37 minutes, assuming they identified the diversion tactic." Morrison made notes on her tablet. "Team Beta wins. Team Alpha gets their 5-mile run, plus an additional hour of remedial cybersecurity training." As they filed out of the shipping container, Sarah's teammates were energized by their success. Miguel Rodriguez clapped her on the shoulder. "That was incredible work. Where did you learn to think like that?" "Practice," Sarah replied, her standard non-answer that revealed nothing while technically being truthful. Lisa Patterson was practically glowing with relief and excitement. "I thought we were doomed when I saw that shipping container. But you made it look easy." "It wasn't easy," Sarah corrected. It was just a matter of staying focused on the real problem instead of getting distracted by the obvious one. Tony Williams looked thoughtful. You know, I've been doing corporate security for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone work through a scenario like that. You were completely unaffected by the audio distractions. You identified the attack pattern faster than our competitors with their comfortable environment, and you coordinated our response like you've done it 100 times before. Sarah adjusted her glasses, a gesture that had become familiar to her teammates. I guess I work well under pressure. The afternoon brought a new challenge, a simulated hostage rescue scenario that combined tactical planning with real-time decision making. The recruits were divided into different roles. Some would play hostage takers, others would be hostages, and the remainder would plan and execute the rescue operation. Sarah found herself assigned to the rescue team along with Marcus Thompson, who had recovered from his morning defeat with renewed determination to prove his leadership capabilities. Jennifer Walsh was assigned as a hostage, while David Kim and several others would be playing the role of hostage takers. This is more my speed, Marcus announced as they were briefed on the scenario. I've got experience with tactical situations from my football days. Strategy, leadership, coordinating team movement, that's what this is really about. The scenario was complex. 6 hostages were being held in a mock office building, with the hostage takers demanding specific concessions and threatening to harm their captives if their demands weren't met. The rescue team had to develop a plan that would neutralize the threats while minimizing risk to the hostages. Marcus immediately took charge, his confidence restored after the morning setback. Okay, we need to establish entry points, identify target locations, and coordinate our approach. Sarah, you're good with the technical stuff. Can you handle communications and monitoring? Sarah nodded, accepting the support role without argument. It was exactly what everyone expected from her, competent technical support, while the more dynamic personalities handled the tactical decisions. But as the scenario unfolded, subtle cracks began to appear in Marcus's leadership. His approach was aggressive and direct, based on overwhelming force rather than careful analysis. He wanted to breach multiple entry points simultaneously, counting on speed and surprise to overcome the hostage takers. That's going to put the hostages at risk, Sarah observed quietly, studying the building layout. If we go in loud through multiple entry points, they'll have time to react. Speed is our advantage, Marcus replied, his tone dismissive. We hit them hard and fast before they can organize a response. Sarah examined the scenario details more carefully. The hostage takers are positioned to have clear lines of sight to their captives. If they hear us coming, they can neutralize the hostages before we reach them. Then we don't give them time to react, Marcus insisted. We breach simultaneously from 3 directions and overwhelm them with coordinated movement. Sarah studied the building schematics, her mind working through the tactical problem with the same methodical approach she'd used for the cybersecurity challenge. What if we create a distraction that draws them away from the hostages first? Like, what? A fake negotiation crisis. Make them think the negotiations are falling apart, that we're preparing to storm the building from the obvious entry point. While their attention is focused on the expected threat, we infiltrate through a route. They're not watching. Marcus considered this, his competitive nature warring with his recognition that Sarah's analytical approach had worked well that morning. That's more complex than it needs to be. Sometimes the direct approach is the best approach. Sometimes, Sarah agreed, but not when the stakes are this high. The scenario began with Marcus's team positioning themselves for their coordinated assault. Sarah took her assigned position at the communication station, monitoring radio traffic and building schematics. But instead of simply providing technical support, she began implementing her alternative approach. Using her access to the building's communication systems, she created a series of false signals that suggested a major tactical operation was being prepared at the main entrance. Radio chatter, equipment movement, even fake thermal signatures that would be detected by the hostage-takers' monitoring systems. Meanwhile, she identified a service entrance that provided access to the building's utility areas. The route was longer and more complicated, but it would allow a small team to approach the hostage location without detection. "Marcus," she called over the radio, "I'm seeing movement from the hostage-takers. They're repositioning to cover the main entrance." "Perfect," Marcus replied. "That means our distraction is working. All teams, prepare for coordinated breach." "Wait," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of urgency that hadn't been there before. "I've got a better angle. There's a service route that will put us directly behind their position. If we can get one person in through that route while they're focused on the main entrance, we can neutralize the threat before they know we're there." Marcus hesitated. This wasn't the plan they'd agreed on, and accepting Sarah's alternative meant acknowledging that her tactical thinking might be superior to his own. "That's too risky," he decided. "We stick with the original plan." Sarah made a decision that would have surprised anyone who'd been watching her passive behavior over the past 2 days. "I'm going in through the service route. Give me 2 minutes. Then execute your breach. If I can't neutralize the threat, your approach will still work." Before Marcus could respond, Sarah had left her communications position and was moving toward the service entrance with the kind of fluid movement that suggested extensive training in tactical operations. The service route was exactly as challenging as the schematics had suggested. Sarah moved through cramped maintenance corridors, utility tunnels, and ventilation spaces with the confidence of someone who'd navigated similar environments before. Her small frame, which had seemed like a disadvantage in the physical tests, became an asset as she squeezed through spaces that would have been impassable for larger team members. When she reached the hostage location, she found herself positioned behind the mock hostage takers with perfect sight lines and positioning. The scenario's role players were focused on the main entrance, exactly as her distraction had intended. "Targets acquired," she whispered into her radio. 3 hostage takers, all focused on primary entrance. Hostages are secured and out of the line of fire, moving to neutralize. What happened next would have shocked anyone who'd been watching Sarah's quiet, unassuming behavior since her arrival at Quantico. She moved through the space with the precision of a trained operator, neutralizing the mock hostage takers with techniques that demonstrated extensive close-quarters combat experience. "Hostages secure," she announced over the radio. "All threats are neutralized. Scenario complete." Marcus Thompson arrived at the scene 30 seconds later, his coordinated assault team finding nothing but secured hostages and a situation that had been resolved with surgical precision. "How did you ... he began, staring at Sarah with an expression of complete bewilderment. Sarah was already checking on the role players who'd been acting as hostages, her demeanor returning to the quiet competence that had characterized her behavior throughout the program. Service route worked exactly as planned. The distraction kept them focused on the wrong threat vector. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the scene. "Interesting approach, Jen. Where did you learn close-quarters tactics?" "Self-defense classes," Sarah replied, her standard non-answer that revealed nothing while being technically possible. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of self-defense classes teach tactical movement and threat neutralization?" "Comprehensive ones," Sarah said, adjusting her glasses in the gesture that had become familiar to her fellow recruits. As the recruits gathered for the day's debrief, the dynamic had shifted in ways that would have been impossible to predict. That morning, Sarah Chun, the quiet woman who'd seemed destined for a support role, had demonstrated capabilities that defied easy categorization. Her teammates were looking at her with new respect, while Marcus Thompson was struggling to reconcile his assumptions about leadership with the reality of what he'd just witnessed. But Sarah remained exactly as she'd been since arriving at Quantico, quiet, unassuming, and seemingly unremarkable. The only difference was that a few people were beginning to wonder if there might be more to her story than she was letting on. Rodriguez gathered the recruits for the evening briefing, his expression suggesting that the day's events had been more revealing than anyone expected. Today's exercises demonstrated something important about assumptions. Sometimes the person you least expect to excel is the one who's been holding back the most. His eyes found Sarah in the group, and for a moment, she met his gaze with the kind of steady confidence that made him wonder what else she might be hiding. Tomorrow brings new challenges, Rodriguez continued. Get some rest. You'll need it. As the recruits dispersed, Sarah lingered for a moment, her eyes once again scanning the base with the practiced assessment that had become her habit. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the Virginia landscape dotting her room that night. Sarah sat on her bunk with a small cloth-wrapped package in her hands. The silver Trident pin caught the light as she examined it, its weight familiar and comforting. She'd worn it for years through missions and challenges that would have broken most people. Now it was hidden away, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth about who she really was. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and new opportunities for her fellow recruits to discover that sometimes the quietest person in the room was the one with the most to say. They still had no idea what was coming. The third day began differently. Instead of the usual wake-up call from Rodriguez, the recruits were roused by the sound of helicopters landing nearby. Through the barracks windows, they could see military personnel unloading equipment cases and setting up what appeared to be a field operations center. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stood in the briefing room, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man in his 50s wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide his military bearing. His gray hair was cut short, and his eyes held the kind of intensity that came from years of high-stakes operations. "This is Director James Blackwood from a specialized government agency," Morrison announced. "Today's exercises will be conducted under his supervision." Blackwood stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits with professional assessment. Yesterday's performance raised some interesting questions about readiness and capability. Today we're going to find out who you really are when everything goes wrong simultaneously. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Sarah sat quietly in the back row, her expression unchanged, but something in her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. She was paying attention in a way that suggested familiarity with this type of briefing. "You're about to participate in a joint exercise," Blackwood continued. "Cyber warfare, physical infiltration, and crisis management all happening at once. The scenario is simple. A terrorist cell has taken control of a government facility. They have hostages, they've compromised the computer networks, and they're threatening to release classified information unless their demands are met." He gestured to a large display screen that showed a detailed facility layout. "Your job is to resolve all three problems simultaneously. Some of you will work on cyber, penetration, and network security. Others will handle tactical operations. Everyone will need to coordinate under pressure while dealing with incomplete information and changing conditions." Marcus Thompson raised his hand. "What kind of teams are we talking about?" "Mixed teams," Morrison replied. "Cyber specialists, paired with tactical operators. You'll need to work together because the problems are interconnected. You can't solve the cyber issues without physical access to certain systems, and you can't execute tactical operations without intelligence from the compromised networks." Sarah found herself paired with three recruits she hadn't worked with closely. Amanda Foster, a former Air Force communications specialist. Blake Harrison, an ex-Marine with demolitions experience. And Rachel Martinez, a civilian contractor with expertise in signal intelligence. Marcus Thompson was assigned to lead a different team, his frustration visible as he realized he wouldn't be working with the most successful group from the previous day's exercises. Jennifer Walsh ended up on a team focused primarily on cyber operations, while David Kim was assigned to tactical planning. The exercise begins in 30 minutes, Blackwood announced. You'll be transported to the mock facility where the scenario's already in progress. The clock starts the moment you arrive. The mock facility turned out to be a repurposed office building about 20 miles from Quantico. As their transport vehicles approached, the recruits could see smoke rising from several windows and hear the distant sound of simulated gunfire. Whatever they were walking into had been designed to create maximum stress and confusion. Sarah's team was dropped off at a staging area behind the building, where they found basic tactical equipment and a field communications setup. Amanda Foster immediately began establishing radio contact with other teams, while Blake Harrison inventoried their available gear. Rachel Martinez started analyzing signal intelligence data that was streaming in from monitoring stations. The cyber intrusion is extensive, Rachel reported, her voice tight with concentration. They've got control of building security, communications, and what looks like sensitive database access. But the good news is, they're not as sophisticated as they think they are. Blake Harrison looked up from his equipment check. What do you mean? They're using commercial hacking tools with standard configurations. Professional, but not military grade. That suggests we're dealing with skilled criminals rather than state-sponsored operators. Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the tactical implications. Commercial tools mean predictable vulnerabilities. They'll have standard backdoors and logging protocols that we can exploit. Amanda Foster's radio crackled with updates from other teams. Marcus's team is reporting heavy resistance at the main entrance. Jennifer's cyber team has identified the primary intrusion vector, but can't shut it down remotely. Why not? Sarah asked. The attackers have physical control of the main server room. They've isolated it from external network access. Someone has to get inside and manually override the security protocols. Sarah studied the building schematics on her tablet. The server room is in the basement, 3 levels down from ground level. Getting there means going through hostile territory. Blake Harrison checked his gear one more time. That's assuming we can even get into the building. Marcus's team is having trouble with just the front entrance. Sarah's fingers moved across her tablet, pulling up architectural details and building systems information. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the parking garage. From there, we can access the utility levels without going through the main building. That sounds like it could take hours, Amanda protested. The hostages might not have that long. Depends on how fast we move, Sarah replied, already gathering specific pieces of equipment. Rachel, can you maintain signal intelligence monitoring while we're underground? I'll need line of sight to the building for optimal reception, but I can set up a relay system. Sarah shouldered her pack with movements that suggested extensive field experience. Amanda, coordinate with the other teams, but don't tell them our exact route. If the attackers are monitoring communications, we don't want them repositioning to counter our approach. Her teammates followed her lead as she moved toward the parking garage entrance. Sarah's navigation through the underground areas was confident and efficient, as if she'd studied the building layout for weeks rather than minutes. The maintenance tunnels were exactly as challenging as expected, cramped, poorly lit, and filled with mechanical equipment that created both obstacles and noise. Cover. Sarah led the way, her movement through the confined space demonstrating a comfort level with underground operations that surprised her teammates. How do you know where you're going? Blake whispered as they navigated a particularly complex intersection of pipes and conduits. Building schematics, Sarah replied, though her navigation seemed to rely more on intuition than constant reference to her tablet. They reached the utility access to the server room after 20 minutes of careful movement. Through the access panel, They could hear voices and electronic equipment operating on the other side. Sarah pressed her ear to the panel, listening intently. 2 people, maybe 3. They're focused on the computer systems, not watching for infiltration. How can you tell? Rachel asked. Voice patterns and equipment sounds. They're having technical discussions, not maintaining security protocols. Sarah carefully removed the access panel, revealing a view into the server room. 2 men in tactical gear were working at computer terminals, their backs to the utility access point. A 3rd person was monitoring communications equipment near the door. Standard takedown protocol, Blake whispered, recognizing the tactical situation. Sarah shook her head slightly. We need them alive for information, and we can't risk gunfire near the server equipment. Close quarters, silent neutralization. What happened next demonstrated skills that went far beyond anything her teammates had seen before. Sarah moved through the access opening with fluid precision, covering the distance to the first target in seconds. Her approach was silent, professional, and devastatingly effective. The first attacker was neutralized before he realized anyone was in the room. The second turned at the sound of his colleague hitting the floor. But Sarah was already moving, her techniques displaying training that clearly went beyond civilian self-defense classes. The 3rd attacker at the communication station had time to reach for his weapon, but Blake Harrison emerged from the access tunnel and handled the situation with his own military training. Room secure, Sarah announced, already moving toward the computer terminals. Rachel, I need you to analyze their intrusion methods while I work on system restoration. Rachel Martinez stared at Sarah with undisguised amazement. Where the hell did you learn to move like that? Advanced self-defense, Sarah replied, her standard non-answer, while her fingers flew across the computer keyboards with the same professional competence she'd demonstrated with every other challenge. The cyber intrusion was extensive but not insurmountable. Sarah worked through the attacker's protocols with systematic efficiency, identifying and neutralizing their access points while preserving evidence of their methods. They were after personnel files, she announced after several minutes of analysis. Specifically, classified military personnel records. This wasn't random terrorism, it was targeted intelligence gathering. Amanda Foster's radio crackled with updates from other teams. All teams, hostages have been secured on the upper floors. We need confirmation that the cyber threat has been neutralized. Working on it, Sarah replied, continuing her methodical restoration of system security. Rachel, can you verify that all external connections have been severed? External connections are down, but I'm seeing residual activity in the local network. They might have installed persistent access tools. Sarah's analysis deepened, her expertise becoming increasingly difficult to explain as civilian cybersecurity knowledge. Found it. They installed a hardware keylogger on the main authentication server. Even if we restore all the software security, they'll still have administrative access. Blake Harrison looked at the server equipment with frustration. Can we remove it? Not without risking system damage. But we can feed it false information while we rebuild security from a clean backup. Sarah's solution was elegant and sophisticated, demonstrating knowledge of advanced cyber warfare techniques that should have taken years to develop. She implemented countermeasures that not only neutralized the intrusion, but created false trails that would mislead the attackers about the extent of their compromise. System security restored, she announced after another 10 minutes of intensive work. All external access blocked, persistent threats neutralized, and security protocols upgraded beyond the original configuration. Director Blackwood's voice came through their radio. All teams, exercise complete. Return to the staging area for debrief. As Sarah's team made their way back through the underground tunnels, the dynamic had shifted once again. Amanda Foster kept glancing at Sarah with barely concealed curiosity. Blake Harrison was openly reassessing everything he thought he knew about their quiet teammate. Rachel Martinez looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle that was missing critical pieces. "Sarah," Amanda said as they emerged from the parking garage, "I've worked with a lot of specialists over the years. What you did in there wasn't standard training." Sarah adjusted her glasses, the familiar gesture that had become her signature deflection. "I've had good instructors." "What kind of instructors?" "Thorough ones." The staging area had been transformed into a full debrief facility, with multiple screens displaying analysis of each team's performance. Director Blackwood stood at the center, reviewing data with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and several other officials who hadn't been present during the initial briefing. Marcus Thompson's team arrived looking frustrated and exhausted. Their assault on the main entrance had been successful, but costly in terms of time and resources. Jennifer Walsh's cyber team had made progress, but been unable to complete their objectives without physical access to the compromised systems. David Kim's tactical planning team had provided valuable intelligence, but struggled with real-time adaptation when the situation changed faster than their planning could accommodate. "Interesting results," Blackwood announced as all teams assembled. "Most of you performed exactly as expected based on your backgrounds and training. But one team achieved objectives that should have been impossible given their stated experience levels." His eyes found Sarah's team in the group. Team Delta completed their cyber objectives ahead of schedule, neutralized physical threats with 0 casualties, and implemented security upgrades that exceeded the original system specifications. More importantly, they did it using techniques that suggest training well beyond what any of you have claimed to possess. Sarah remained motionless, her expression unchanged, but several of her fellow recruits were now staring at her with open speculation. "Chun," Blackwood continued, "your performance analysis indicates familiarity with advanced cyber warfare protocols, specialized tactical movement, and crisis management procedures that typically require years of field experience to develop. Care to elaborate on your background?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm a fast learner." "That's one explanation," Blackwood replied, his tone suggesting he had others in mind. "Another explanation is that you've been significantly underrepresenting your qualifications since arriving here." The tension in the staging area was palpable. Every recruit was now focused on Sarah, waiting for her response to questions that had been building since her arrival at Quantico. "Morrison," Blackwood said without taking his eyes off Sarah, "I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about the screening process for this program." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private." "No," Blackwood replied firmly. "I think everyone here deserves to understand what's really going on. Chun, I'm going to ask you one more time. What is your actual background?" Sarah looked around the staging area, taking in the faces of recruits who'd been working alongside her for 3 days while having no idea who she really was. Marcus Thompson looked confused and slightly angry. Jennifer Walsh appeared fascinated. David Kim was clearly trying to piece together clues he'd missed. Blake Harrison, Amanda Foster, and Rachel Martinez, her teammates from the day's exercise, were watching with particular intensity, having witnessed capabilities that defied easy explanation. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the small cloth-wrapped package she'd been carrying since her arrival. Her movements were deliberate and calm as she unwrapped the silver pin, its distinctive trident shape catching the afternoon light. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several recruits gasped audibly. Marcus Thompson's mouth fell open. Director Blackwood's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching respect. Sarah held the Navy SEAL Trident in her hand, its weight familiar and comforting after years of wearing it with pride. "My name is Sarah Chun," she said, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "I'm a retired Navy SEAL with 8 years of active duty service, including multiple deployments in cyber warfare and special operations." The silence that followed was complete. Every person in the staging area was processing the implications of what they'd just learned. I was recruited for this program specifically because of my background, Sarah continued. The question wasn't whether I could handle the challenges. The question was whether I could work effectively with personnel who didn't know my history. Marcus Thompson found his voice first. "You've been testing us." "We've been testing each other," Sarah corrected. "The difference is that you knew it was a test." Director Blackwood stepped forward, his demeanor now completely professional. "Chun, your performance has been exemplary. The question now is whether your fellow recruits can adapt to working with someone of your caliber." Sarah looked around the group, seeing her fellow recruits with new eyes. Some looked intimidated. Others appeared excited by the revelation. A few seemed to be reevaluating every interaction they'd had over the past 3 days. The mission parameters just changed, she announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd led teams through situations far more challenging than training exercises. "The question is whether you're ready to step up to a different level of operations." Amanda Foster was the first to respond. "What kind of different level?" Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at Quantico, and the expression transformed. Her entire appearance. The quiet, unassuming woman was gone, replaced by someone who radiated competence and authority. "The kind where we stop playing games and start preparing for real missions," she replied. "Because if you think the last 3 days have been challenging, you haven't seen anything yet." The recruits stood in stunned silence as they processed the reality that their quiet, unremarkable teammate was actually one of the most elite operators in the U.S. military. Everything they thought they knew about capability, leadership, and their own potential had just been turned upside down. Sarah Chun was no longer hiding who she was. And that meant everything was about to change. The transport back to Quantico was unlike anything the recruits had experienced. The comfortable chatter and nervous energy that had characterized previous rides was replaced by an almost electric tension. Sarah sat in her usual spot near the back, but everything about her presence had changed. The silver Trident pin was now visible on her uniform, and her posture carried the unmistakable confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide. Marcus Thompson kept stealing glances at her, his expression cycling between embarrassment and fascination. 3 days of assuming leadership based on physical presence and college athletics suddenly seemed laughably inadequate compared to 8 years of Navy SEAL operations. Jennifer Walsh was the first to break the silence. "How many missions?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the vehicle's engine. Sarah looked up from the tactical manual she'd been reading. "Classified. But you've been in actual combat? Multiple theaters. Different types of operations." David Kim leaned forward, his technical curiosity overriding his intimidation. "The cybersecurity work you were doing, that wasn't theoretical, was it?" "No," Sarah replied simply. "Most of my deployments involved electronic warfare and network penetration in hostile environments." Blake Harrison, who'd worked alongside her during the building infiltration, shook his head slowly. "I knew something was different about the way you moved. That wasn't self-defense training. Close quarters combat, urban warfare, maritime operations." Sarah confirmed. "Plus specialized training in cyber operations and intelligence gathering." Rachel Martinez looked stunned. "All those times you said you'd learned something from practice or reading blogs, you were talking about actual military operations." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I couldn't reveal my background without compromising the exercise parameters. You needed to be evaluated on your natural responses, not on how you thought you should behave around a SEAL." Amanda Foster spoke up from the front of the transport. "So this whole program, what is it really?" Before Sarah could answer, Director Blackwood's voice came through the vehicle's communication system. "All recruits report to Conference Room Alpha immediately upon arrival. We have new mission parameters to discuss." The recruits exchanged Glances, the implications clear. Whatever they'd signed up for originally, the revelation of Sarah's identity had changed the game entirely. Conference Room Alpha was a secure facility none of them had seen before. The walls were lined with screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds, and the table was equipped with encrypted communication systems. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison was present, along with Director Blackwood and two other officials in civilian clothes who radiated the same quiet authority. "Sit," Blackwood ordered, his tone making it clear this was no longer a training exercise. "What you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. Your participation in this program has been accelerated due to current operational requirements." Sarah took a seat at the table with the natural confidence of someone who'd attended similar briefings countless times. The other recruits arranged themselves around her, unconsciously deferring to her experience even though the new dynamic was still sinking in. 3 weeks ago, Blackwood continued, we intercepted intelligence indicating a coordinated cyber attack against critical infrastructure targets. The attackers are using a combination of sophisticated hacking techniques and physical infiltration to compromise systems that were previously considered secure. One of the civilian officials activated a display screen. The attack pattern suggests a hybrid threat, not just cyber criminals or traditional terrorists, but a well-funded organization with access to both advanced technology and trained operatives. Marcus Thompson found his voice. "What does this have to do with us?" "The attackers have been targeting facilities similar to the one you infiltrated today," Morrison replied. "Government installations, military bases, critical infrastructure sites. They're looking for specific types of classified information." Sarah leaned forward, her analytical mind already processing the implications. "Personnel records?" "Among other things," Blackwood confirmed. "They appear to be building profiles of military and intelligence personnel, particularly those with specialized training and security clearances." "They're hunting operators," Sarah said, her voice carrying the grim certainty of someone who'd seen similar patterns before. "That's our assessment. Which brings us to why this program exists." The second civilian official took over the briefing. "We need teams that can counter this hybrid threat. Cyber specialists who can think tactically, tactical operators who understand electronic warfare, and leadership that can coordinate both elements under pressure." Jennifer Walsh looked around the room nervously. "Are you saying we're being recruited for active operations?" "You're being evaluated for active operations," Morrison corrected. "The question is whether you can function as an integrated unit, with the kind of diverse skill sets these missions require." Sarah's teammates from the day's exercise were beginning to understand the true scope of what they'd participated in. Amanda Foster spoke up. "The building infiltration today, that was based on actual intelligence?" "Similar scenarios have occurred at 3 different facilities in the past month," Blackwood confirmed. "Each time, the attackers used the same combination of cyber intrusion and physical penetration that you encountered today." David Kim looked pale. "And they succeeded?" "Partially. They've obtained classified information, but we don't yet know the full extent of what they've accessed." Sarah studied the intelligence displays with professional interest. "Have there been any personnel casualties?" 2 security guards at the second facility. Both survived, but they were neutralized using techniques that suggest military training. The room fell silent as the recruits processed the reality that they were discussing actual ongoing operations rather than theoretical exercises. "Chun," Blackwood said, addressing Sarah directly, "your assessment?" Sarah considered the information carefully before responding. "The hybrid approach suggests they're adapting to our security improvements. Traditional cyber attacks are being detected faster, so they're adding physical elements. Traditional break-ins are too risky, so they're using cyber tools to create opportunities." "Agreed. Which means our response needs to be equally hybrid," Sarah nodded. Integrated teams with cross-training in both domains. Cyber specialists who can handle tactical situations. Tactical operators who understand network architecture. Exactly. Which brings us to the question of whether the people in this room can function as that kind of integrated unit. Marcus Thompson shifted uncomfortably. With respect, sir, most of us have only been here 3 days. We barely know each other, let alone trust each other with actual operations. That's true for most of you, Morrison replied. But Chun has been evaluating your capabilities since you arrived. Her assessment will carry significant weight in determining who moves forward. All eyes turned to Sarah, who was now clearly the senior person in the room, despite having maintained a cover identity for 3 days. The transition from hidden observer to acknowledged leader was complete. They all have potential, Sarah said, after a moment of consideration. But potential isn't the same as readiness. Explain, Blackwood ordered. Sarah looked around the table, meeting each recruit's eyes before speaking. Marcus has natural leadership instincts and physical capabilities, but he needs to learn that leading a team isn't the same as leading a football squad. Tactical situations require adaptability, not just aggression. Marcus accepted the assessment without argument, recognizing that Sarah's evaluation carried the weight of actual experience. Jennifer has excellent fitness and motivation, but she needs confidence in high-pressure situations. She has the skills. She just needs to trust them. Jennifer nodded, apparently relieved that Sarah saw potential rather than just weakness. David knows cybersecurity theory as well as anyone, but he needs practical experience with systems under attack. Real intrusions don't follow textbook patterns. David Kim looked thoughtful rather than defensive. What would that practical experience involve? Field deployment, Sarah replied. Working on live systems while dealing with active threats. She continued around the room, providing assessments. That demonstrated she'd been carefully observing everyone while maintaining her cover. Her evaluations were precise, constructive, and clearly based on professional experience. The question, Sarah concluded, is whether everyone is willing to train at the level these missions require. Because if we're talking about active operations against trained adversaries, half measures will get people killed. Blake Harrison, who'd worked most closely with Sarah during the building infiltration, spoke up. What kind of training are we talking about? Sarah looked to Blackwood, who nodded. For her to continue. Advanced tactical operations, real-time cyber warfare, coordinated infiltration techniques, and crisis management under actual combat conditions, Sarah explained. Plus cross-training so everyone understands both domains well enough to adapt. When situations change, Amanda Foster asked the question everyone was thinking. How long would that take? Depends on how fast you learn and how hard you're willing to work, Sarah replied. Traditional training cycles take months or years. We might have weeks. The room fell silent again as the recruits contemplated the reality of accelerated training. For actual operations, Rachel Martinez finally spoke. What happens if we say yes? You become part of a classified program that doesn't officially exist, Morrison replied. Your previous lives end and you become something entirely different. And if we say no? You return to your previous assignments with no record of this conversation ever taking place. Sarah watched her fellow recruits process the choice they were being offered. 3 days ago, they'd thought they were competing for slots in a cybersecurity program. Now they were being offered the opportunity to become part of something that sounded more like science fiction than military service. I need to know, Marcus said finally. Are we talking about domestic operations or overseas deployment? Both, Blackwood replied. The threat is global, and our response needs to be equally flexible. Jennifer Walsh looked around the room nervously. How do we know? We're ready for something like this. Sarah answered before the officials could respond. You don't. Readiness comes from training, experience, and working as a team. What you need to decide is whether you're willing to find out what you're capable of. The recruits sat in contemplative silence, each weighing a decision that would fundamentally change their lives. The quiet woman they'd underestimated for 3 days was now offering to lead them into a world they'd never imagined. The choice was theirs to make. The conference room remained silent for nearly 5 minutes as each recruit wrestled with the most important decision of their lives. Sarah watched their faces, recognizing the internal struggle she'd seen in countless operators who'd faced similar crossroads. The difference was that most people got years to prepare for this moment. These recruits had 3 days. Marcus Thompson was the first to break the silence. "If we do this, you'd be our team leader?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "That would be the logical assignment, yes." Marcus nodded slowly, his competitive nature warring with his recognition of reality. "3 days ago, I thought I was the strongest person in this room. Now I'm realizing I don't even know what strength looks like." "Strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest," Sarah replied. "It's about doing what needs to be done when everything is falling apart around you." Jennifer Walsh spoke up, her voice uncertain. "What if we're not good enough? What if we fail and people die because we weren't ready?" "People might die anyway," Sarah said bluntly. "The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or watch from the sidelines while others handle it." David Kim had been quietly studying the intelligence displays. "The cyber attacks they're describing, they're more sophisticated than anything I've worked with before. I'd be learning on the job." "We'd all be learning," Amanda Foster added. "Even with Sarah's experience, working as a team would be new for all of us." Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering how much to reveal about the reality of special operations. Every mission involves learning on the job. Training gives you the foundation, but real situations always present variables you've never encountered before. The key is having teammates you can trust to adapt with you. Blake Harrison looked around the room. "Do we trust each other that much after 3 days?" "Trust is built through shared experience," Sarah replied. "We've already started that process. The question is whether we want to continue building it." Rachel Martinez had been unusually quiet since the briefing began. Finally, she spoke. "Sarah, what made you decide to become a SEAL?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. "I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, something that mattered. And this matters. Protecting people always matters. The methods might be different, but the mission is the same." Director Blackwood, who had been listening to the conversation without interruption, finally spoke. "I need decisions in the next 10 minutes. The threat timeline doesn't allow for extended deliberation." Marcus straightened in his chair, his decision made. "I'm in. I came here thinking I knew what leadership meant. Sarah's shown me I have a lot to learn, but I want to learn it." Jennifer Walsh took a deep breath. "I'm in too. I'd rather fail trying than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference." David Kim nodded decisively. "The cybersecurity threats are beyond anything civilian agencies can handle. If this is where the real work is being done, then this is where I need to be." One by one, the rest of the recruits committed to the program. Amanda Foster, Blake Harrison, Rachel Martinez, and the others who had survived the 3-day evaluation all chose to step into an uncertain future rather than return to the safety of their previous lives. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of pride and responsibility. She'd led teams before, but never one composed entirely of people she'd trained herself. The weight of their trust was both energizing and sobering. "Outstanding," Morrison said, making notes on her tablet. "Transport to the advanced training facility departs in 2 hours. Gather your personal effects and prepare for an extended deployment." As the official briefing concluded and the recruits began filing out of the conference room, Blackwood approached Sarah privately. "Chun, your assessment stands. You believe this team can be operational within weeks rather than months? Sarah considered the question carefully. They have the raw capabilities and the motivation. With intensive training and the right mission progression, yes. But they'll need real experience under controlled conditions before facing the primary threat. Understood. You'll have full authority over training protocols and team development. What about command structure for actual operations? You'll report directly to Morrison and myself. Operational command will be yours, unless circumstances require higher-level intervention. Sarah nodded, accepting the responsibility that came with leadership. I'll need complete psychological profiles on all team members, plus detailed analysis of the threats we're likely to face. Already being prepared. Anything else? Sarah glanced toward the door where her new team was gathering. Their belongings. Time. The more we have for preparation, the better our chances of success. You'll have as much as the situation allows. But Chun, the attacks are escalating. We may not have the luxury of perfect preparation. Understood, sir. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself on another transport with the same recruits who had arrived at Quantico 3 days earlier. But everything had changed. The nervous energy of people unsure of their capabilities had been replaced by the focused determination of individuals who understood the stakes. Marcus Thompson sat across from Sarah, no longer trying to assert dominance but clearly studying her leadership style. Jennifer Walsh was reviewing technical manuals with the intensity of someone who knew her life might depend on the information. David Kim was already collaborating with Rachel Martinez on cybersecurity protocols. The advanced training facility was unlike anything the recruits had imagined. Located in an undisclosed location, it combined state-of-the-art technology with realistic training environments that could simulate everything from urban warfare to maritime operations. Sarah stood before her team in their new briefing room, the silver trident pin catching the light as she addressed them as their acknowledged leader for the first time. The next phase of your training will be unlike anything you've experienced, she began. We'll be working with live ammunition, real explosives, and actual network intrusions. The margin for error is minimal, and the consequences of failure are severe. She paused, meeting each person's eyes. But you're not the same people who arrived at Quantico 3 days ago. You've already proven you can adapt, learn, and work together under pressure. Now we're going to find out just how far that capability extends. Marcus raised his hand. What's our timeline for the first real mission? That depends on how quickly you master the advanced protocols, Sarah replied. But based on the threat assessment, I estimate we have 2 to 3 weeks before deployment. The team exchanged glances, the reality of their commitment fully sinking in. 3 weeks to transform from recruits into operators capable of handling threats that had stumped traditional law enforcement and military units. Questions? Sarah asked. Amanda Foster spoke up. Are you confident we can do this? Sarah's expression was serious but determined. I'm confident you have the potential. Whether you realize that potential depends on how hard you're willing to work and how much you trust each other. She gestured toward the training facility visible through the briefing room windows. The quiet woman you ignored for 3 days is gone. From now on, you're working with a Navy SEAL who's going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before. The question is whether you're ready for that. Jennifer Walsh smiled for the first time since the revelation. We've been underestimating people all week. I think we're ready to stop doing that. Sarah nodded, satisfied with the response. Then let's get started. We have work to do. As her team filed out toward their first advanced training session, Sarah remained in the briefing room for a moment, looking out at the facility that would forge them into the operators the mission required. 3 days ago, she'd been the quiet woman they ignored. Now she was their leader, responsible for transforming a group of talented individuals into a cohesive unit capable of protecting national security. the recruits had learned not to judge by appearances. Now they were about to learn what was possible when potential met purpose under the guidance of someone who'd already walked the path. They were beginning. The real training was just getting started. 6 months later, Team Delta completed their 15th successful mission, neutralizing a cyber-physical threat that had challenged conventional response protocols. The quiet woman with glasses was now a legend within classified circles, known not just for her own capabilities, but for her ability to develop extraordinary teams from ordinary people. Marcus Thompson had become her second in command. His leadership, skills honed by understanding that true strength served others rather than dominating them. Jennifer Walsh had evolved into one of the military's most effective tactical operators. David Kim's cybersecurity expertise had prevented 3 major infrastructure attacks, but perhaps most importantly, they had learned that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one nobody notices until they reveal who they really are. The silver Trident pin still caught the light, but now it was accompanied by the insignia of a unit that didn't officially exist, serving missions that would never be publicly acknowledged. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages, and sometimes the people others ignore are the ones who change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.